Hello, beautiful people of Africa and the global world at large. Thank you and thanks for joining us thus day. It's Global Insight live from Moscow, the capital city of Russia, and we are actually meeting Yulia Berg, a political scientist who also doubles as the founder of Global's Experts Club. Today we want to discuss, have an insightful discussion with her regarding the recent discussion pertaining the Russian-Africa partnership. The discussion held at the State Duma, that is the Russian Parliament, on the 1st of March 2024. They'll discuss a whole lot of issues, and I remember the deputy chairman of the State Duma saying categorically that the African countries are keen and intentional about cooperating with the Russian Federation. So during this insightful discourse with Yulia Berg, we want to understand deeply what the discussions were all about and how, of course, the Russia-Africa cooperation can be taken to another dimension. Time for us to welcome Yulia Berg. Hello to you, Yulia Berg. It's a pleasure having you this day, and of course for you accepting to talk to the Pan-African Media for You Media regarding the recent discussions pertaining the Russia-Africa relationship at the State Duma here in Moscow. Thank you.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure, and I'm very happy to welcome you here in Moscow this time during the historical events happening. And there was a lot of discussions recently, which is definitely contributing to the development of relationships. So if you don't mind, I would like to give a little bit of a context just for a better
Absolutely. I was actually coming to that to understand holistically what this discussion was all about, the content and of course the objectives.
Yeah, so it's quite understandable that in the recent maybe 2 or 3 decades there have been almost no cooperation between Russia and Africa. And even before that, when we look at the background and the history, what Russia, or at that point Soviet Union, was mostly associated with was the support of African countries in their struggle for independence. And then some of the infrastructure projects and some of the educational exchanges. So I would assume that at that point, when someone would hear Soviet Union, the clear associations that would come in would be Kalashnikov as a symbol of that struggle for independence, and education infrastructure and those large-scale projects in energy and some other areas. So that's what it was all about. And especially starting from the 90s, when the Russian Federation itself has changed its format after the collapse of the Soviet Union, there has been almost nothing happening up until recently. And Russian Federation was itself in quite a crisis. There was a change of regime, change of everything basically, and it took a while in order to reassemble everything that was, let's say, torn apart, and put together the economy of the country and get back to a decent spot at the international arena, because that was also the case. And the reason why I'm mentioning this bit in particular is that comparing the situation in some of the African countries that have also gone through certain turbulence and regime changes and other issues, including military conflicts, which unfortunately the Russian Federation also has quite a lot of experience in.
Absolutely,
and given the fact that in many African countries you also have a great variety of different languages being spoken, different cultures, different religions, it's also something that within the country here we have been dealing for a while, because the regions that the Russian Federation consists of also have in many cases very different background. You have regions with the vast majority of Muslim population, you have Buddhist regions, you have a region that is, I would assume, the only historical one with Buddhist tradition dominating, which is Colonial, for instance. So it's also a great variety, but unfortunately those facts are also not really known, right?
Absolutely.
So when we talk about cooperation, we need to consider the context, I believe, when we try to understand where and how we can collaborate. So pretty much nothing was happening ever since the 90s up until, if I'm not mistaken, 2019, when a new document was approved. And what's important about it is that it created certain guidelines for international relations, and it created a certain roadmap, right?
Absolutely.
Because before there was no clear understanding of what we could even do. So another fact that played a huge role in the recent active, let's say, interest and big amount of different kinds of events happening, and generally speaking, the turn towards Africa from the Russian Federation, of course, is the global turbulence. Absolutely. And global transformation that we're going through, especially when the situation in Ukraine and in Donbass intensified. So there we have been observing active military conflict, or not just observing, but it was something that was touching upon, tens of thousands of people, if not millions of people. So that conflict that came to an active phase in 2014 also resulted from a coup d'etat in Ukraine, and basically we see very similar neo-colonial practices being applied in Ukraine and in many African countries. So we see the very same patterns used over there. And when the conflict reached another level in 2022, and it was actively described by the Western media as Russia attacking Ukraine, which was not exactly the case, as the conflict started even before, and there were tens of thousands of lives already lost ever since 2014, which is also important to understand. But that conflict basically somewhat divided the world into two camps. And one camp is mostly the Western countries, using all of the possible military capacities they have in order to supply them to Ukraine, using all of the media resources and media monopoly, I would say, in order to promote their perspective and point of view. And the other camp is basically Russia and some of the countries that support Russia's position, yes. And mostly, if you look at it, the countries that support the Russian position are the countries of the global south. And the reason why this is happening is because those countries, to a great extent, have also suffered from the very same patterns when they have to give out their resources, when they have to face unequal treatment, when they're not able to set the rules of the game or even take an active part in elaboration of the rules of the game, even when it comes to the issues that are critical, like their own economy, political regime, and many other critical factors. So even big businesses and corporations and the ones operating in those countries are not being chosen by them to a great extent, but they're selected and brought from the external side. So I would assume that the active interest towards the Russian Federation itself from Africa and African leaders, African people generally speaking, is related to the fact that Russia decided not to drop on its knees, but to stand still and to stand for its interest. Again, with machine guns in their hands. And again, the struggle unites us in the very same, in different battles of the very same war. So that's why security has become one of the key, or it has been, even in the times of decline of cooperation, security and munition, it has always been an important part of cooperation. And if you look at the economic stats, you would also see that quite a lot of cooperation was based exactly on that. So, sorry to make it a bit...
No, that's the essence for us to understand. Actually, the states, like you mentioned, quite a lot of things which have been really problematic. And if for you, media is in Russia is to appraise the situation and actually give objective information out there pertaining the global changes, especially on the era of the Russia and Ukraine crisis, and why many countries in Africa are actually standing with the Russian Federation. While talking earlier on, you made mention about I call it some sort of a game of interest that is actually involved in the Russia-Ukraine crisis. Coming back to how the state parliament regarding the discussions that were held recently, what parameters are they putting in place to change the information pattern in order to bring the right side of history, especially to the people who know little or nothing about the escalation of the crisis. It's only in 2022 with the start of the military operation that some people were aware of the crisis in the Donbass. So what are those practical parameters that the State Duma is putting into place regarding the just concluded discussion pertaining Russia-Africa relationship?
Well, it's very clear why there is not enough of information and maybe not enough of interest in or among the African audience towards the happenings in Russia, because unless you understand that context that I just referred to, and unless you understand that basically we're in the same war and in very similar situations, just fighting different battles, it does make sense to follow on something that's happened in a country that is quite far away, not related to you by any means, and also is not connected to you in terms of economy, whatever. There are no fresh associations aside for the recent developments in the western and central parts of Africa, where Russian specialists have been ensuring security. So in terms of information, it's also important to understand that neither the Soviet Union nor Russia were ever proactive in terms of media outreach. So if you try to find content about Russia in English or French language, probably more than 90% of what you find would be content generated by the Western companies, and of course they put their own perspective into it. So neither the Soviet Union nor Russia were ever good at promoting culture or movies or episodes or whatever else that could give an understanding even about the way of living in the country, or to create any associations, because the policy and the approach has always been, all right, if you want something, we're here, just come over, learn the language and get exposed to, whatever you wish. So it was never an expansion, and it was never a attempt to kind of trickle through and to, have that kind of a cultural expansion. And on the one hand, it's a policy of non-intervening into internal affairs, but on the other hand, we see the negative effects of that, because if I would be almost sure that if you ask a person in the street in Douala, like, what do you know about Russia, like how do Russians live and what are the dishes that they prefer and whatever, the person wouldn't be able to say anything. And it's because of, well, there is no motivation to have interest in that. That's number one. And number two, there are no sources of information that would be coming directly from here. So recently the situation has been changing, and it's important to mention that at the state level, at the level of the governmental strategies, and at the level of the strategy promoted by the Russian president, Vladimir Putin. So what they have been doing recently is trying to make sure that there are more connections between people, between businesses. So for that reason, Russia-Africa summits were organized, and the first one ever took place in 2019 in Sochi. Then the second one in 2023 in St. Petersburg. Due to the pandemic, there was quite a big gap in between those events. And then even the regular events taking place in Russia, like the Parliamentary Forum and many other ones, they would have either separate sections on Russia-Africa, just like the St. Petersburg Economic Forum, or else they would have, there would be events specifically dedicated to that. So through those horizontal ties between experts, between business people, between civil servants and so on, those relations could develop. And of course we should mention the role of the Russian military specialists that have been quite active in Africa in terms of providing training and trying to improve the situation in terms of security, because I think that has become just as recognizable as a brand as Kalashnikov and Putin, because those are the top three recognizable, I would assume, at the moment, let's say, names in especially in the central and western parts of Africa.
Okay. Just to complement what you said, I remember while the president of the Federal Republic of Russia was addressing the nation some days ago. He actually mentioned that the Russia-Africa summit actually created a greater scope for Africa, and then Russia is not going to stay back, but also to continue to see and support Africans in their quest for sovereignty in these times of global changes. And it will be taking us to the next question. Participants at the State Duma still underlined that, of course, Africa has a lot to offer. But then I want us to understand, when people think about Russia and Africa, they think about Russia coming only in the sphere of maybe security and defense. So what other areas of cooperation can be, or is the Russian Federation already involved as far as the strengthening ties with African countries is concerned in this present context?
Yeah, I've been building up to answer your first question through other two, and I will definitely elaborate as well on the very specific issues that were being discussed at the State Duma in order to provide legislative support, right? But in order to come to this, we need to dig through many interesting facts.
Absolutely.
And so, answering your question regarding the areas of cooperation and prospective areas of cooperation, well, in those recent years that the businessmen, the officials, the experts, activists were coming to Russia, and Russian actors from business, from civil society and so on were traveling to Africa in a more frequent way, and not just to South Africa, that is a clear partner in BRICS, and that's why there are much more ties and everything, and they're much more diverse. So that opened up the eyes, I would say, of each other to the actual situation on the ground. And so the Africans coming to Russia could see that what else Russia has to offer is IT technologies and a great variety of solutions, digital solutions to civil services, delivery services, and many other areas that have become a very very routine practices here in Russia. And there were good examples of Russian businesses coming in to Africa and providing that kind of digital services and platforms wherever it was applicable. At the same time, the Russian business and activists and officials and various delegations that have been traveling to Africa recently, they could see that at the moment, due to the previous, especially Chinese investment, there is a very developed infrastructure for trade, for instance, in all of the port terminals, are making it much easier to bring goods in and to take goods out than the development of the agricultural sector, and generally speaking the fertile soil of the African land also creates opportunities not just for a simple exchange of fertilizers and fruit and vegetables, but it also opens up perspectives in terms of joint ventures and building facilities for processing agricultural products, for making canned food, and different other kinds frozen, both for the local market and for the external market, because clearly in Africa you can harvest up to like 4 times per year. Absolutely, right? So and there is a huge it's a huge continent with a lot of very fertile land that could be used for agriculture. And since in Russia the climate conditions are much more harsh, so we're used to ensuring not just our needs but also being able to sell agricultural products, especially grain, out. And you can imagine how difficult it is in a country where like half of the year you have either snow or other conditions that are not really favorable for agriculture. Sure. Yeah, and it's valid for many other areas, because when you look at the energy infrastructure, Africa is a continent with a very young population and intensively growing demand for electricity. Definitely needs solutions that would be able to cover not just the needs of the households, but also the needs of production.
Absolutely, yeah, which is very imperative,
Absolutely.
Like, you mentioned, sorry that I'm interjecting, just in line with what you're saying, because some pundits still argue like, Russia is not going to be different from other traditional powers that have been present in the continent for a whole lot of years. But, others are still of the viewpoint of that it is better to kick off with another partner, to see how imperative or the importance of this in the boosting. It's all about ensuring a cooperation that will lead to maybe the total transformation of the continent Africa. It is richly blessed. So I think let me just join this with this question: how you perceive the openness of African states towards cooperating with the Russian Federation, and then how optimistic they are about the fact that this cooperation will surely lead to the transformation that the continent needs at this particular moment, especially the economic transformation that will actually make the young and vibrant youthful population very active in the areas maybe economy and otherwise.
Energy generation could be a major game changer for the continent, because at the moment, I'm not sure about the very recent statistics, but around 4 or 5 years ago when I was looking at it, around 2/3 of the population of sub-Saharan Africa didn't have regular access to electricity. Why energy is a game changer? Because, on the one hand, it can ensure production and industrial capacities being introduced, and that means own production, that means added value to the product. So the countries wouldn't have to sell just raw materials, they would be able to process them and set the price themselves, which is essential as well. Then they would be able to use the infrastructure for a fast-tracked digitalization, and that means a lot, from access to education. That would mean that even a person in a very remote village somewhere through a tablet would be able to access the courses or courses provided by the best universities, right? Then it creates jobs, because the way the economy is structured right now, a lot of activities have gone to digital, and especially the pandemic has shown that you don't always need to go to the office, and you can get a lot of things done just having your smartphone with you and your laptop.
Sure.
So that creates jobs, and what is also important, it creates jobs for mothers, well, females, generally speaking, that in many cases are not able to, be as active as males are in terms of, entrepreneurship and all this. That creates additional opportunities for people with limited health capacities or, disabled for the very same reason. That opens up educational opportunities just generally speaking for, self-development for millions and millions of people. So it really is a major game changer, because having an industry and having production can ensure a very clear growth in terms of economy. And you can see as a great example, China, right?
Indeed, yeah.
So China 50 years ago was, you couldn't call it a super developed country with all of the infrastructure and everything else.
Sure.
But now that they produce almost everything that you could possibly see in any country, any environment, from the magnets with Eiffel Tower that you would put on your fridge to very sophisticated, almost like spaceship equipment and satellites and everything. I mean, they have gone this path in a very limited amount of time. Because they had a good strategy, number one, and number two, since a lot of production was moved from Europe and the United States into China, so they started off just having cheap labor, let's say, and a bad economic situation, and in 20 or maybe 30 years, they have come to a situation in which China is the main trade partner of many countries. Most of the countries in the world depend on China in terms of the goods that China supplies, and it was all done softly, without any attempts to change regimes or any attempts to introduce military to the countries that do not agree with that policy, like we saw France doing in Côte d'Ivoire, or many other examples of that kind of things. So energy is a major game changer, and I think here we would also see some very good developments related to cooperation with Russia, because Russia, again, given the fact that it's a very big country with not that much population, and at the same time it's a country with a very complicated climate where just 15% of the territory is somewhat comfortable for living and doing agriculture. So you have those areas where the temperature is below zero like most of the year. So being able to do mining in such complicated conditions, being able to provide sustainable energy infrastructure in such conditions, means that doing the very same thing in a country that is not or on a continent that is not super cold but super hot would probably be easier, just because at least water doesn't
it is
freeze.
time for the moment for exchange of expertise to actually give impetus to this relationship between the Russian Federation and Africa. Now let's look at this aspect, because you know from our previous discussions you've been very intentional highlighting that indeed we're in a world of global transformation, and there is need for competition, but you capitalize on the need for healthy competition, and still bring in, when you look at two people coming on the table, it's what do I gain from this person, and what will this person actually gain from me? And talking about it's about when you look at Africa today, you see there is a quest to see that the continent actually thrives given its endowment, and that's why the flagship project, the African Continental Free Trade Area, actually is already there, and countries have started trading under the guidelines of the Continental Free Trade Area. So now I still want to particularize to see how of what importance will this marriage between Russia and Africa help the continent to be more of a production continent than just an importer of already finished goods and an exporter of raw materials. You can attest that, the soil, the African continent is richly endowed both in natural resources and even the human capital. You made an example of China, cheap labor. Africa has all of those things. So now we need the know-how. How will this marriage between Russia and Africa maybe in the years to come show feasible transformation in terms of economic development and even why not the social development around the continent that will even give people the quiet to say it was good Africa collaborated with the Russian Federation?
Now, in terms of the global transformation, the key framework concept that the West is currently actively fighting against, but it's unstoppable and there is nothing you can do about it. It's inevitable for a new system to come. So it's the multipolarity or multilateralism, which means that you have many actors, many sovereign actors, each of which is capable of making own decisions and is able to bring what they have to the table in order to trade it in a more balanced and fair way, right? So when you look at what it means for Africa, and even cooperation with like the BRICS countries and the BRICS Plus, because it's a bigger number of countries at the moment. What it means for Africa is that instead of selling their raw materials and using cheap and in some cases even slave labor in order to dig out the rare earth material, rare earth metals and other like raw materials and send them to France, for instance, the continent can choose partners and say, okay, fine, Chinese come and build infrastructure, Russians come and bring the cheap and durable technologies or bring us digital technologies, like India, we can cooperate in terms of production.
So it's about redefining Africa's foreign policies.
Yes, you don't have to sell what you have cheap to France, for instance. And I'm mentioning France because France has been the key beneficiary. Right? Other countries, when you look at how much they invest, and of course they do invest, the United States and the European Union, they do invest into Africa, but trust me, they take much more. And simple analysis would show you those figures that it's always investing a little bit, just like sprinkling some dollars over the continent and taking out much more. And I mean, you don't need even if you're a complete, not even a foreigner, but an extraterrestrial coming to look at the map of Africa, especially when you talk about the central and western parts of Africa, you will see even by the railroad infrastructure that it has not been fair. I mean, most of the railroads would lead from, mines to the seaport, and that's it. I mean, even in the south of the continent, you had a much more smart, strategic, and humane approach because the British probably understood a bit better that if you invest well into the infrastructure and ensure trade and ensure, growth of the economy itself, you can, even within the framework of the neo-colonial model, you can deal with stronger entities, right? Rather than in France, where the French would leave and just destroy all of the infrastructure and like burn everything behind them. So unfortunately, that was the case in the west of Africa, for many countries. But at the same time, it creates a lot of opportunities because, I mean, when you look at, some of the countries of the western part of the continent, everything is needed. So you can look at the whole variety of what the world has to offer and make own decisions like, okay, infrastructure to come from China or, the port terminals to be upgraded by the Chinese, IT solutions to come from India, energy solutions to come from Russia, and so on. So that is key principle of the multipolarity that we'll talk about, but we haven't really seen in action, but that's what it's supposed to be about. And key thing that you need for it is sovereignty.
Indeed,
because
yes.
when you have your financial system regulated by France and the currency exchange rates set by France and other key economic decisions made outside of the country, there is no fair trade you can even possibly be discussing, right?
Sure.
So, and that's why the West is actively fighting against those unions. That's why they're applying so much pressure on the African countries, both in terms of imposing sanctions and just threatening people that are even traveling to Russia, trying to do business with Russia. But also in terms of the media and information wars and expansion, trying
Absolutely,
to demonize the country, say that there is nothing you can possibly even get from it. Of course, Russia doesn't have, for instance, financial resources to the same extent China has them, right?
Yeah.
And it would have been quite stupid to try to compete in terms of that. But in this multilateral model, what you have is first, once you have sovereignty, you keep it real and you evaluate what you actually have and what you can bring to the table and what you need in terms of partnerships. And another important thing that I would like to mention in terms of differences between the approach of the Russian Federation and the approach of the, let's say, the Western countries in terms of Africa. When you look at the resources like gold and diamonds and rare earth metals and everything else, we have it all. We don't need to take it from Africa. I mean, you can always trade that and whatever. But in Russia, the natural resources are not even used to the full extent.
Absolutely.
So when you look at the costs and logistics and everything, okay, you can mine gold in Africa. But then with the logistics and with the fact that you cannot fully process it in the country, so you take raw material to Russia, let's say, and then you process it, and then you make, some item that you can eventually sell or use it in for creation of hardware or whatsoever else. The cost-benefit analysis wouldn't, in most of the cases, wouldn't tell you that you should even go for it.
Sure.
For European countries and for the United States, the situation is a bit different because they do not mine anything. Well, they do mine something, but they do not mine enough. They try not to use their own resources, and when they have access to the super cheap African resources, of course, they choose to use it. But in Russia, with at the moment we have around less than 160 million of population. With the new regions added to the country.
Absolutely,
so it's less than Nigeria in terms of population and in terms of area, it's much more. So you don't need to go out for resources like Europe does, because again, Belgium, France, a lot of their economy is based on what they have literally stolen from Africa, right? And when you now, there are certain things that always would make me laugh because everyone knows the famous, good Swiss chocolate, for instance,
Absolutely,
or the amazing chocolate produced in France or Belgium. But if you ask those people, do you even know how cocoa plant looks like? No one would tell you. And it's like, no, this is our production. We're so famous for it. But sorry, where do you take it from? The same with English tea, for instance.
And I think there's already a wind of change blowing across the continent, Africa, and even the political stakeholders are quite more aware of the narratives now. And I think that a lot is being done to draw the lines between cooperation and, of course, interference, which I would also want you to elaborate on.
Absolutely. So when you look at it, for instance, you look at Russian corporations, right? The ones building nuclear plants or the ones involved into energy infrastructure or mining, like Rosneft, Gazprom. they wouldn't even really go for active cooperation with Africa, because they already have quite a lot of sites that they do not even use in Russia, or other accessible ones. So they're feeling very comfortable at the moment, especially given the fact that the demand for the Russian gas and oil is not gone.
Sure.
And now they're making double of the money they were making before the beginning of the special military operation, because the demand is still there, but you just have more of midwives in the process. So you first sell it to Dubai or India or somewhere else, and then the final European or American or whatsoever else customers, they get the very same thing, but like double the price, or with the growing prices. So there is no rational need for the Russian corporations to become active unless there is a governmental strategy based on the will to cooperate. So you don't have that kind of economic or rational kind of explanation for the Russian corporations to get in. I mean, to diversify their businesses, maybe to invest into something else, maybe, but that would be it. And in many cases, it's not enough to actually launch the projects. And we've seen examples of Rosatom, for instance, that several years ago they were planning to build nuclear plants in South Africa first, and then in Zambia, and now there is a project in Namibia, which are not really going far because there is active media campaigns, active work conducted through the NGOs against those nuclear plants. And Rosatom is like, fine, we're not getting into this information war. If you guys want a nuclear plant, we're here. If you don't want a nuclear plant, fine, So that's a very different approach. But I do understand that, especially now, given the fact that the Russian official Ministry of Defense and military is entering with instructors to countries like Burkina Faso and Mali and Niger and Central African Republic, for ordinary people, like in the street, that or in some village, right, that do not follow the geopolitical agenda much.
Absolutely,
it's hard to explain the difference between these white people and those white people.
Those white people, it's
but
true,
the difference is there. I mean, it's just that these white people are not active in promoting their, public image or whatever else. They're not coming to say we bring democracy and whatsoever else. So that's the difference, and unless it goes explained, or unless it goes kind of felt in a practical way, it would be really hard to understand the differences. But the key point here is that, Russia as a country has that population of, that is less than Nigeria, for instance. It has all of the necessary resources and a lot of land that we do not even deal with in any shape or form, because 2/3 of the Russian population live on this European side, so on this side of the Ural Mountains and Siberia. The 2/3 of land we have, there is no one. I mean, there is even a governmental program that provides land for free for all of the Russian citizens in the what we call the Far East, those regions bordering Japan.
Okay.
But not too many people want to even use it. I mean, there is no problem with like land or resources, but there is an issue in terms of this geopolitical pressure. And when you talk about colonization, or generally speaking, all those methods, creating controlled, like West-controlled opposition, working through the media, kind of making sure that those quite perverted to a great extent values trickle in, or trying to make sure that the very core of the culture, religion is being questioned. And in many cases, what you see coming in is not just simply destructive, but it's quite satanic, right?
Absolutely.
So when you see, Ukraine is probably what Russia would have looked like if it was fully colonized, right?
Absolutely.
And when you see what happens also to the church, So they try to divide and conquer everywhere, including the issues related to the church and, the Orthodox religion itself. So once they managed to complete that mission, what you had happening within the churches and the temples during the festive seasons and everything, it was complete nonsense. And when you see those videos, those images, you understand that what is actually happening is that they're trying to break people from the inside, break them from the inside in terms of messing up their value systems, messing up their key kind of like priorities in life, right? And if that's the model that is being brought, and the other side, the so-called barbaric global South and Russia, which is in the eyes of the West the very same thing, like the barbarians from Russia, barbarians from the global South, that all need to be taught and explained how to live the life well, traditional values that are being still mostly supported in those countries, values of family values, values of, generally speaking, development, and it's the same in Asia, in Africa, in Russia. Those are the ones ensuring evolution, ensuring development, and ensuring that life continues in a constructive way, which unfortunately cannot be said about the agenda that the West is actively promoting for everyone to get into.
Indeed, of course, we are in an era of greater information, and I'm also quite aware that you have actually founded this global experts club. And can you actually elaborate on the significance of this experts council and the development and support of this cooperation between the Russian Federation and the African continent? I think we are concluding with that aspect here.
Well, the Globalist Expert Club was founded at the very beginning of March 2022, right after the beginning of the special military operation, so around 2 years ago. Yeah. And it was founded specifically to discuss the post-transformation agenda. So at that point, I should tell you that at that point, many of the international experts that we were holding discussions with, they wouldn't even dare to go public with that agenda because of the pressure, because of the demonized image of Russia. Yeah. Yes, and I mean, me personally, I'm sanctioned since 2021, and not too many people at that point would even dare to, have something coming up in public, with me, like events or even like photos or whatsoever else. Now, but I see that the situation is changing. More of experts are openly speaking, coming to Russia. They do not just talk in their like kitchens or closed, environment about the issues that worry them. But the idea of the expert club was to focus on constructive agenda, because even within the framework of the special military operation, what is being discussed is denazification, de-dollarization, and a lot of de and anti-neo-colonial whatsoever agenda, but not too much of constructive agenda, laid out. So the idea was to discuss the image of the desirable future emanating from, the expert point of view, because unless you talk about it and do something towards that, you might face the future that you wouldn't like.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Indeed.
So that's the point. And going back to the very first question that you asked, now that we see the full complexity of the processes, both at the local level and at the global level, I should say that it's a very important step. Creation of an expert council as a part of the state parliament, and Mr. Alexander Babakov, who's also quite experienced in energy issues, by the way. So he has the strategic understanding of what that cooperation could be based on and how it can be created. And it's very clear that you need to lay the very foundations that are in this case the legislative framework, to make sure that the Russian businesses not even the big corporations, but medium-sized businesses and small-sized businesses have support from this side to go to Africa. Now, to reach out to see what they, have, what they got, how we can cooperate, because even in terms of like simple things like tourism and everything else, there is a lot that can be done. And once we have direct flights, Russian companies could bring in tourists and help to, create the infrastructure that, that could be useful for tourists and whatsoever else. And, invest even at small scale into small enterprises and those kind of things. So, but legal framework is essential, and making sure that we can even trade has a lot to do with the financial and payment systems, right? Because at the moment, with all of the sanctions, it's really hard to find a way. And the recent sanctions were affecting more banks and more institutions that are dealing specifically with that. But I think that the more pressure the West puts, especially on such an essential area as finance, the faster an alternative system would emerge, because it was being discussed a lot, and also in the framework of the BRICS, with South Africa's active participation in those discussions. And I'm absolutely sure that the more pressure applied, the faster it wouldn't be a revolution at the global level, but I see it as a fast-forwarded evolution that will be taking place, and it's simply inevitable. So I hope there are not too many victims of the process.
Absolutely, yeah. That's why it is necessary, yeah, like important that in the quest to see this new world order, we shouldn't lose the entire population in it. And of course, I want to really thank you so much. I know we can talk like for 10 days, because there's a lot to talk about regarding the global changes, the dynamics, and of course understanding the political or geopolitical maneuvering of everything. And I'm very pleased that you could accept to talk to the Pan-African media, for you media. We've been to Donetsk to appraise also what is happening and actually relay the information as it